Sustainability is reinventing markets. From transport and construction to heating and food, businesses are realising new opportunities for commercial growth. Today, I'm joined by Accenture's Toby Siddle and Samantha Barber to explore what this future might look like and how you can take advantage. Welcome back to Tomorrow, Today. Toby, Samantha, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Samantha, sustainability is reshaping entire industries. The potential for growth is huge. What is driving this change?
What I think is really interesting is I noticed sitting in the boardroom early on in the pandemic that sustainability suddenly moved centre stage. Yeah. We'd been talking about sustainability for 10, 20 years, but in a different way. And that's changed.
So almost sort of edging to the sides, now potentially front and centre. Toby, tell us more about the drivers.
So I think, Samantha, to your point, it is definitely top of mind, and the urgency and the opportunity now is greater than ever. Yeah. And also, I think, after the pandemic and the last few years, the world's a bit more match fit to deal with some of the things we need to. But I think there are sort of three really broad drivers. The first is that we're still heading in the wrong direction on emissions and climate change. And actually, we need to turn that around. And we've seen an IPCC report earlier this year confirming that. And our own research says we've got to pick up the pace of reducing emissions twofold by 2030 and then fivefold by 2040. That's a lot of acceleration that needs to happen. Second is consumers and investors alike are looking for traceability and transparency on ESG before they decide where to put their money. Yeah. And the regulators are helping them. And then the younger generations will not let this go and will keep that demand up. And in fact, they won't work for businesses that aren't taking it seriously. And finally, we've seen a lot of challenges on supply chains around the world, geopolitics and cost of living. And that may give us the impression that, some more fossil fuels need to creep back in to ease the pain. But actually, I think it reminds us of resilience and security. And the solutions to that are actually sat right at the heart of sustainability.
So tell me then, Samantha, you sit on boards, you work with a whole range of industries and companies. How do these conversations play out in the boardroom?
I think one of the number one things is that boards are looking to see different type of information coming into the boardroom. So different type of data, different type of evidence, because decision making has got more complex. There's no doubt about that. And when things are complex, what you really need to make sure is that you're getting the right information into the board with the leadership teams in the C-suite to make sure there's clarity around what decisions need to be made, why do they need to be made, and how does that really fit in to the ambition that they have for the future going forward.
Yeah, and that challenge is made more complicated by the fact that it isn't just data within their own organisation, it's far broader. Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, I think it's really about the wider ecosystem. So if you are a big company in the supply chain, for example, steel or concrete, really understanding the direction of travel for your clients is really important, because they will be beginning to push demands down into their supply chain, and therefore you need to be able to anticipate that and be able to collaborate with your clients in a way that you didn't before. And so one thing I would really say is whatever looked great in terms of leadership pre-pandemic needs to change now, because actually the way we're going to be operating as leaders going forward is going to be very different because the circumstances are different.
Right, so it seems to me, Toby, like the very same tools that give you a different type of view of your ecosystem could also surface opportunities, new collaborators. Talk to us a bit about the prize, if you like, because it isn't just about offsetting risks and so on.
No, look, I think it's good business, which is to think more sustainability and in a structured way, look for those opportunities. And, the world and consumers will rewire to be more sustainable. And that actually makes it perhaps the biggest investment opportunity in history. And we believe that capital is going to follow and move to those businesses that are on the right side of the shift, those that are really innovating, driving traceability and transparency. And I think it'll penalize those that aren't. And we've looked at 8 markets specifically. And in these markets, what we see is a huge uplift in potential revenue, but also in market share, something like 25% growth on average by 2030 for those businesses in these sectors which are moving towards sustainable alternatives. And we think that's pretty compelling, actually. It's good business, and it pays boards to be aware of it and to be looking for it.
Yeah, so let's explore that a little bit more, Samantha, because this is more than business as usual. This is creating new markets, new opportunities. Examples that come to mind?
Well, I think what's interesting, back to the energy sector, wind turbines and wind farms were innovative 20, 25 years ago. And what we're going to see is some of those wind turbines will be becoming obsolete. It's anticipated that by 2030, we will be recycling in Europe alone 5,700 wind turbines every year.
Oh, wow.
Now that's quite complex because the blades of wind turbines are actually a composite material. Yeah. Those composite materials need to be broken down, and actually there's already a market that the composite materials can move into in the automotive sector, in the aerospace industry, but that requires collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in other words, recycling these blades, pushing them into other industries, but the point is whole new services, products emerge. Toby, feel free to pick a completely different industry, because I'm very keen that we shine a sort of broader light on this.
No, so I'm gonna pick up on a couple of examples. So I'll touch on mobility to begin with, because I think what's happening there is interesting. We've got a commitment to stop, selling internal combustion engines in the UK. Yet today we've got one of the worst networks for EV charging in Europe. Now, we're going to see a surge in trying to solve that in infrastructure. But around that infrastructure, what's going to happen is we're going to see a new mix of convenience opportunities, a new mix of co-location of businesses. And these things are going to become intertwined in great new opportunities. We're also seeing municipalities and public transport looking at hydrogen and biofuels opportunities. In other sectors, we look at home energy. Yeah. And in home energy, we're going to see tens of billions unlocked in the UK alone as we try to get to more sustainable heat. Yeah. And that's not just about installations and energy efficiency. It's also about how our homes are at the center of networks now that are consuming, that are producing, and also sharing in energy networks. Yeah. So there's some fascinating developments.
Yeah, so Samantha, let's go back into the boardroom, because we get the size of the challenge, we get the opportunity, but I want your thoughts on how a board has a better conversation. What sort of new ground rules do you need to put down?
One of the key things, you really want to make sure that your board has really framed the future. They've got real clarity as leaders as to what the next 10 to 15 years is going to look like for them. Then they need to make sure that their board structures, their board composition, the people sitting around the board table are really fit for purpose. That they're there and they're equipped to really bring the scrutiny, the analysis, the diligence that's required. Now, what's really beginning to happen is that institutional investors are looking far more closely at how boards are governed. Yeah. How are they governing themselves? How are they leading? Not so much what they're doing. They want to understand how is that decision being made. And that changes the dynamic, and it changes the leadership as well.
Yeah, so what do you say to the sort of board skeptic who says these conversations are too idealistic? You're talking about problems that can't be solved. I mean, at some point, we've got to bring it back to reality.
Oh, well, I'm a firm believer that quite often you really need to peer into what looks like the impossible. Because by peering into the impossible and really challenging, it brings in a more creative, innovative, dynamic conversation. And that's what's required.
Right. So on what's required, Toby, the rocket fuel that we need is around collaboration. So how do we fuel that in practice? What has to happen?
So I think, first of all, boards and businesses need to be thinking about their impact on growth for their shareholders, but also on the local communities, on climate and on nature. Yeah. And once you truly have sustainability at the top of your agenda, it's actually more about a shared impact than it is about market share, because the markets are tipping your way and there's a massive reallocation of global capital and funds to do that. Yeah. And so there, I think collaboration is really the new Moore's law to accelerate things. And the final, perhaps most important area is to really understand the ecosystem of partners that you need to make sure success in delivery is achieved.
Yeah, I think this is a really good note. Samantha, let's keep going practically.
So what I've noticed as well, and this has only happened in the last couple of years, that sustainability, when it's embedded in the strategy of the business, you're beginning to see business leaders actually being incentivized in their long-term incentive plan with maybe net zero targets, for example, or sustainability goals and ambitions, where that is actually played out over a long period of time. But it does mean that it underpins again those conversations in the boardroom around performance.
How interesting. And are you sort of putting that out there as something which might happen in the future, or are you?
It's already happening now. So I'm already aware of some boards where the leadership teams are part of their bonus, part of their long-term incentive plan includes some net zero targets.
Excellent example, and that is why we talk about tomorrow today. For now, Samantha, Toby, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.